Welcome to CD2 of the Conversational Hypnosis Home Study Program. On this CD entitled Beyond Rapport and Signal Recognition Systems, we'll be looking at how you can create a deep connection with other people, as well as to read their signals so that it seems like you can read their mind. You can be right inside, tracking their thoughts and behaviors. We'll be covering everything from the basics, which some of you will be familiar with, through to more advanced exercises and more sophisticated ideas that will totally transform the way that you relate to other people forever. So, as you're ready to begin now, just sit back, relax, and enjoy learning conversational hypnosis. So let's begin this program by having a look at what rapport actually means. One way to define it is as a close and harmonious relationship in which two or more people understand each other's feelings and ideas and can communicate well. We're going to use that definition as our guidelines as to how to create rapport. Now, to some extent, everyone knows how to build rapport, because you've done so with other people. You've built rapport with your friends, your family, and even with your working colleagues. So what is it that people traditionally do in order to build rapport? Well, the traditional view is to just be nice to someone, maybe a little complimentary, and then to find common experiences which you can share. Maybe a shared interest in sports, or perhaps you went to the same university or came from the same town. Now, all these things actually do work. They actually will create a sense of rapport with most people. The trouble is that most people don't realize why these things work, and so begin to apply them in situations when they no longer are appropriate. The basic rule of thumb behind building rapport with others is that people like themselves. So at some level, showing that you like another person will allow the other person to feel safe or comfortable around you and be happier to communicate and share ideas. That's why common experiences work, because you're saying at some level, look, you and I are alike. We come from the same place. We think the same thoughts. We have the same values. That's what really makes this thing work. So how can we take this concept, refine it, and make it more powerful? Well, some of you will be aware of the idea of matching and mirroring. Basically, what matching and mirroring means is when you copy someone else's behavior, their movements, the tilt of their body language, their signals and their hand gestures, etc., at a level where they perceive it unconsciously but are not consciously aware of it, at that time you tend to build a very strong rapport or connection with the other person. Now, this is something very important, something that a lot of people get wrong. The reason that matching and mirroring works is because it is perceived outside of ordinary conscious awareness. And the reason that a lot of people who try to apply matching and mirroring get into trouble is that when the other person becomes aware that you're copying them, they start feeling upset or somehow feel like you're taking the mickey. So it's very, very important that if you are going to use matching and mirroring, it stays outside of someone's perception. Let's look at an example from an actual research study. In this study, a whole bunch of people were given a presentation, a pitch if you like, by a virtual robot. Now, this virtual robot was programmed to match their body language. What would happen is that specific things like head tilt, hand gestures, body lean were measured as the people were watching the presentation. And then the virtual robot would mirror these things, would actually adopt the same kind of positions with respect to head tilt and hand gestures and body tilt as the people watching, but they were given an exactly 3-second delay to make it less obvious it was happening. Now, at the end of this, they found out which of the presentations were the most persuasive. The interesting thing is that of all the people that took this study, 2/3 of the people didn't realize that the virtual robot was matching and mirroring their behavior. and those people tended to be persuaded by the very ideas that the robot, the virtual robot, was presenting. Now, and this is also something you need to be aware of, about 1/3 of the people found out halfway through the presentation, oh, this robot is actually mimicking what I'm doing. At that point, they were less persuaded than a control group. So in other words, if you're matching and mirroring someone and they find out that you're doing this, you're likely to break rapport and actually get the opposite reaction to what it is that you want. So later on in this program, we'll be having a look at a technique that will allow you to match and mirror someone unconsciously, so that it's very, very unlikely that they'll ever find out that you're doing it. For now, just be aware that matching and mirroring is a powerful technique, but it has limitations, which is why in the rest of this program, this CD, we'll be looking how to go beyond the traditional rapport methods. Let's have a look now at the 6 most common mistakes that people fall into when they try and build rapport with someone else. The very first thing that people do wrong is they try and be nice to people. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out there and start being nasty to people or stop being nice. It's fine to be nice, but only to the extent that it doesn't break down your ability to share or communicate thoughts, ideas, and feelings with someone else. The trouble with being nice is that sometimes people are nice at the expense of the real communication that needs to be happening, which actually then breaks down rapport. It stops helping and starts becoming a barrier. Let's give you an example of a school teacher. A school teacher who wants to be nice to their pupils may let them get away with anything they're doing, and thereby, bit by bit, she starts losing respect, stops being able to present ideas in a way that students will listen, and in the end of the day, it starts going horribly wrong. The same thing can be true of a client. Let's say we have a lawyer talking to their client. There are some things the client needs to hear up front which will not necessarily be pleasant, which will not necessarily be nice. But if the lawyer does not have the courage to turn around and say, hey, this is how it is, and you better sort something out, then he's doing his client a disservice because he stops communicating fully. Now, everyone has actually experienced this when they talk to someone, and maybe you have friends yourself that you've been kind of, I don't know, casually acquainted with for many years. It's almost like there's a social veneer that you can't get past. Why? Because you're too busy being polite, too busy trying to be nice, to actually get through to the real person and to allow the other person to see the real you as well. So, rule number 1 is be nice only to the extent that is not actually interfering with the process of communicating feelings and ideas with the other person. Now, the second mistake that people will typically make is that of trying too hard. The problem with trying too hard is very much related to being too nice to someone else. If you try too hard, you sub-communicate, you send signals out that you're desperate. You're desperate for the company, you're eager to please. Now, the problem with being desperate is very few people actually like to have desperate people hanging around them. Somehow it makes them feel obligated or under pressure, but for whatever reason, it actually begins to shut down communications again. So if you're trying too hard to establish rapport with someone else, the other thing that can happen is you activate what's called the law of reverse effect. The law of reverse effect says the harder you try to do something, the more likely it is you'll fail, because you're consciously interfering with an unconscious process. So when building rapport with someone else, the idea is to fall into this rhythm where rapport happens, to maintain a sense of these are the things that I need to do to make it happen, and then get out of the way to allow your unconscious mind to make these things actually occur. Now again, later on in this CD, I'll be showing you the instant rapport technique that will help you to do this much more easily. Another reason why trying too hard tends to put people off is related to the third common mistake that people make when trying to build rapport. And that's wanting something from someone else too much. The problem of wanting something too much is seen easily when you think back to a time that you walked into a store and you want to buy maybe a stereo or something. The salesman comes up and starts talking to you. But the thing is, they get a little bit too pushy. They want you to buy too much. They want them to like you too much. And because they want something from you, because they're pushing you too far down the process too quickly, you begin to back off. Now, the solution to this is something called fractionating rapport. In fractionating rapport, what all you're going to do is you're going to build a little bit of rapport and then back off. Then you'll build a little bit more rapport and back off, a little bit more, back off, a little bit more, and back off. The law of fractionation is something we'll look at more when we cover hypnotic principles. But basically, every time that you do something, it's the equivalent of tipping your toe in a bucket of cold water. At first, just the big toe goes in. Then you might have all the toes. Then you pull it back out again. Then you'll put the foot in. You'll pull it back out again. And every time that you come back to this experience, it's easier and easier to go deeper and deeper because it seems familiar to you. So fractionating rapport is a technique where you build a little rapport and you take it away again so that the people are constantly in a comfort zone. And that comfort zone is always being stretched a little bit at a time. So to sum up, the first three most common mistakes that people make, and they're all interrelated, it's first of all trying to be too nice. Second of all, trying too hard to establish rapport. And third of all, wanting something too much from someone else, becoming a little bit too pushy to either build rapport or get a certain result. The solution to these three problems is very simple. First of all, realize there's a time to stop being nice in order to save the rapport, to save the relationship. Number two is to use the instant rapport technique that we'll be covering a little later on in order to allow the normal rapport signals to flow unconsciously and naturally. And finally, is to use the principle of fractionation to build a little rapport and then back off and a little bit more and then back off consistently so that over a small period of time you build a lot of large steps. So let's look at what other mistakes people will typically make when trying to build rapport with others. The fourth most common mistake is a lack of genuine interest. The thing about interest is that when you feel an interest inside and your focus is actually on the ideas that someone else is presenting, your whole body language changes. You begin to sub-communicate at a very subtle level signals of interest. Your pupil dilation will change. Your level of focus will be changed. Your movements will be different. And these are things that other people will read very carefully at the unconscious level and be influenced by. So if your own signals which are going out are saying, I'm bored, I'm disinterested, I don't want to know anymore, well, the other people will respond to those signals by shutting down or getting annoyed or just losing interest in the conversation themselves. So there are two simple solutions to this problem. The first solution is what a great therapist called Carl Rogers called having a high, unconditional regard for the other person. Now, no matter what you think of that person normally, whilst you're building rapport with that person, you must inside your mind convince yourself completely and 100% that whatever the other person is saying is worthy of respect. Now, I happen to think that that's a good way to view people in any way. But to have a high unconditional regard for someone else will help them to open up, because suddenly all the signals coming from you are saying whatever you say, you will not be criticized, you will not be attacked, which makes them feel safe enough to begin to share the feelings and ideas that actually characterize a rapport in the first place. Another and slightly more obvious way of doing this is what's called to track back. Track back is similar but different to active listening. In active listening, you're told, well, listen to what someone says, then repeat what they've said to you in different words so that they know that you've heard them. Now, there's a big problem with active listening, and it's that language has a neurological effect on people. There's a difference between someone saying, the baby was in my arms, to someone saying, I was holding the infant. Whilst the information may be the same, the actual emotional tone is very different. It actually fires different parts of the neurology and is understood differently on an emotional level. So if someone says, well, I was holding my baby in my arms, and then you reply, well, so you were holding the infant. The problem is at that point, the person feels like you somehow misunderstood because you've missed the emotional undertones of the conversation. The solution is to track back, to actually use the same words and the same tonalities that someone else has been using. Well, let's give you an example. If I say to you, well, I was walking down the shops and, a person just jumped out at me and scared me. A trackback might track that same information and say, oh, so you're walking down the shops and then suddenly someone jumped out and they scared you. Notice that I'm using the exact same language and reflecting it back onto them. This goes back to the idea of matching and mirroring someone, but I'm doing it in a conversational style so that it fits the context of what I'm doing. Another way that you can actually employ a trackback frame is to say something like, oh, well, let me just make sure I've got this right. You wanted to this, and then you repeat the exact same words back to them. The fifth most common mistake is playing the wrong role in the side of a relationship. Now, when two people relate to each other, their relative status will always be fluctuating. To some extent, someone will be a higher status, someone a lower status, and sometimes they'll be of equal status. Now, when I talk about status, this is not a value judgment. Someone who's higher status does not necessarily mean that they are better people. It's a role that's being played. For example, a teacher and a student. The teacher needs to have the highest status in order to be able to teach the student. The problem is that some people are inflexible, and they can only really relate to someone who is in a particular status. So some people are maybe so frightened that someone will look down on them that they can only ever be in a high status role. So if you try and take your high status role from them, they'll start distrusting you or disliking you for it. So to be flexible in your communication, sometimes you'll play the underdog, sometimes you'll play the equal, and sometimes you'll play the charismatic authority figure that leads the way forward. Now, the trick is to help someone create more flexibility by perhaps starting at the level that they require and then slowly changing it so that they need to adapt to you. But remember, the pacing and leading principle means you move only as quickly as the other person can keep track of what you're doing and actually follow along. Now, the final mistake is something that very few people actually ever realize. This is the difference between what I call deep rapport and wide rapport. Deep rapport is what everyone tries to establish. They try and drill down into depth of a shared experience. Let's say that you and the person that you're talking to both like motorbikes, and you spend hours and hours and hours talking about motorbikes and motorbike conventions. Now, you would think that that is a good thing, that now you have a good relationship going. Well, actually, believe it or not, you've actually just shot yourself in the foot. Let's take an example. Let's imagine that you had a great teacher at school, someone you really got on well with, and you loved going to this person's lessons. Now, one day, you're in the supermarket shopping with your mother, or perhaps you're out with your friends, when this teacher, let's call him Mr. Smith, comes along and starts talking to you, but outside of the school environment. Maybe he's at a party and you're at the same party. How do you feel? Well, if you're like most people, you'll feel a little bit awkward talking to this teacher, maybe in the supermarket or at a party. Why? Because the rapport you have is contextualized. It only fits in one specific place. So when you see them out of context, it somehow feels wrong or unusual. This is a mistake that people make time and time again. The boss at work, the person working with clients. The solution to this mistake is to create what I call wide rapport. In wide rapport, you actually give them many different experiences of you in many different environments. The way to create wide rapport is essentially one of two things. Either you meet them in lots of different locations, so that every location creates a new set of memories of you two interacting together. And that creates a wider set of context in which it's okay for you guys to interact. Another way to create wide rapport is through your use of storytelling. The more stories that you tell about different types of topics, themes, ideas, the more they get a real sense of your entire personality and actually build rapport with that. So you don't get limited to just one track. You have all these different tracks, and after a while, when you've opened enough topics, the other person will spontaneously assume that they can talk to you about anything. When we get to the storytelling or hypnotic storytelling part of this course, we'll give you plenty of exercises and loads of ideas of how to actually tell different kinds of stories that will allow people to build rapport in different ways. Hypnotic storytelling goes much further than just the ability to build rapport, but it's very, very important within this context as well. So, now that you're aware of the most common mistakes and have some simple solutions, you can actually begin to refine your abilities to start building with rapport with more people and more elegantly as well. At this point, I want to address a very important hypnotic idea. This is going to take your rapport skills beyond the normal range. It's what I call hypnotic rapport. Now, in some respects, hypnotic rapport has been around as long as human beings have. Because it's a side effect of trance, no one fully understands what it is yet, but we know that it happens, and we know that it's incredibly powerful. Basically, whenever someone goes into a trance around you, when they come back, they'll bring with them a deepened state of connection with you and your own unconscious mind. There's a deep sense of trust and a real sense of comfort in your company. And this is a very, very powerful side effect of someone simply helping someone else to go into a trance and come back again. It's a very healthy thing in my opinion. Now, one of the things that occurs there is that you get an unconscious connection. What happens when two people connect unconsciously is that they begin to explore thoughts and ideas that they didn't even know they had until that moment in time. I remember when I was a small boy, I used to be very shy. And my parents used to keep throwing these dinner parties at which, as children, we'd be expected to come along and, make conversation with the guests. Now, I found something very unusual would happen at these dinner parties. And some guests I'd talk to, and I would be totally charismatic. I'd have fantastic new ideas, and it's almost like I was a genius at the dinner table. Now, with other guests, typically the more shy or awkward ones themselves, the more reserved ones, I felt awkward even saying hello. I would always get stuck with the same old questions like, hi, where are you from, what do you do, what's your name? And even those questions themselves seemed somehow dull and lifeless, and some of the conversation kept dying. For years I thought, what's wrong with me that I would be this split personality, charismatic and highly intelligent at one time, and almost stupid and inept at other times. Until one day I realized, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the other people. You see, the people I felt comfortable around, the ones where I began to come out of my own shell, were people who were so comfortable in their own skin. They projected a sense of well-being, a sense of comfort, a sense of trust, that I began to feel comfortable inside myself and started trusting the ideas and thoughts that are always inside me and began to communicate those. The people that I would shut down with would do the exact reverse. The things that they sub-communicated at an unconscious level would make me feel so awkward and inhibited and nervous that all my ideas would just be cut off before they even began properly. And this got me to thinking, how can we use this as a way of really generating this kind of hypnotic rapport much more quickly? How to create this instant rapport with a complete stranger so they feel like they've known you for years and they trust you and they feel comfortable around you. On the next track, you're about to experience a mild hypnotic process, which means you'll require to use all your focus and attention. So if you're driving a car or operating any kind of machinery, stop whatever you're doing before you move on to the next track, so you can pay full attention and safely listen to the recording. So as soon as you're ready to do that now, just sit back, relax, and enjoy the following hypnotic process. So one day I decided to experiment with this idea. This is after some time of acquiring all kinds of different skills, both in hypnosis and just in relating to people in general. And I remember I was out one night in a bar with a friend of mine called Brian. So Brian and I were standing there in the bar having a chat as usual, and from time to time I would strike up a conversation with a stranger and it would go really well. And Brian would turn to me and say, "Hey, how do you do that? How can you suddenly sort of make friends amongst people who don't even know you yet?" And it got me thinking, and I wanted to experiment with something. So I said to Brian, "Listen, Brian, there are times that you meet someone, or have friends in fact, that you're really close to. Now when you think about a friend or a person that you're really close to, it could be a parent, a friend, or a loved one, there's a certain feeling you have inside, isn't there?" And Brian, of course, nodded and said, "Of course there is." I said, "Look, if you were to just point at a place inside your body where you feel that most intensely, where would that be?" And Brian pointed at his chest. So I said to Brian, "I want you to focus on that point in your chest. I want you to focus on the feelings that being in deep rapport with someone else has. And as you begin to focus on that sensation, you'll notice there's maybe like a color or sensation attached to it." He said for him, it was a sense of a comfortable royal blue. I said, "Brian, take this royal blue feeling and begin to spread it around your body. The more you pay attention to it, the deeper it becomes. It'll begin to spread across your chest and down into your belly, giving you a real sense of comfort, a real ease inside yourself. And the more you pay attention to that royal blue feeling, the more it spreads around the rest of your body, into your arms, into your legs, even to your head, so you begin to think comfortable thoughts, royal blue thoughts." And as Brian began to think about all these things, experiencing the sensation of that royal blue comfort spreading throughout his body, I asked him to notice how as it really becomes stronger and stronger, it begins to almost seep out of his very skin. So there's almost a comfortable royal blue aura that surrounds him. It's like an energy field surrounding him, like a warm blanket of comfort, a royal blue blanket. And as Brian was standing there, thinking about these things and experiencing that, I asked him to turn around and just spot someone in the bar, someone he didn't know, and then begin to feel these feelings and explore that royal blue sensation until it began to move forward in his mind, growing and growing all the time. The more it grew, the more it could begin to reach out towards that other person, as though a giant hand was reaching out from inside him just to touch the outside texture of that person's clothing. So that as he looked at the other person, he could almost feel what it would feel like to touch the texture of his shirt with his own hand. And as he did that, to allow that royal blue sensation, those colors and feelings, to mingle in with the other person and really go inside that. Suddenly Brian stood there and he was smiling and feeling comfortable and expanding that sense of awareness into the other person. And there's something really interesting happening. Brian's breathing began to synchronize with the breathing of this other person. Now this other person still had their back turned to Brian. And at some point as Brian was doing these things, synchronizing his breathing at the same rate as this other person, he casually turned around in the bar as he was talking to his own friends, and out of the corner of his eye he spotted Brian. And Brian just smiled and thought whatever thoughts he was thinking. And this other person seemed almost compelled to come over and start talking to us. He started asking Brian all kinds of questions of where he was from. In fact, he was so convinced that him and Brian had met sometime in the past, he wouldn't believe when Brian told him that he was sure that they never knew each other before. At that time, Brian learned a very valuable lesson, and that is the lesson of being able to project the sense of rapport, a comfort and trust in other people, to the point that they pick up on it and reciprocate the exact same thing back to you. And as you think about it now, there have been times in the past when you've instantly connected with another human being, And in those times, you know that you had exactly the same experience of taking a sensation inside your body, and it's almost seemed to reach out and move into the other person's experience. So you began to think nothing but beneficial thoughts, a high positive regard for the other person, and you began to smile, and as you felt comfortable and trusting of the other person, they instantly reciprocated, feeling the same sensations towards you, which allowed the relationship to happen all at once. And how you did that was something that was outside of your awareness before. Now you can do it on purpose, because your unconscious mind can build comfortable relationships with almost anyone on the face of this earth. And all you have to do is give it the right set of instructions. Later on, in this CD, when we cover the instant rapport technique that you've just experienced, you'll have the very steps that Brian did, so that you can build an instant rapport with almost anyone that you want to. Now the really interesting thing is, as Brian and this stranger started talking to each other like they knew each other for years, I noticed the strangest thing. Not only was their breathing really synchronizing, but also Brian and this other person began to move in the same rhythms. The body postures began to match and mirror each other's automatically. You see, this is a function of rapport. The more it happens, the deeper it becomes automatically. Now you can look forward to having the same kind of experiences in the kind of relationships that you form. And as soon as you've realized that for yourself, you can come back to a normal state of awareness and really appreciate the power of your own unconscious mind. Now, another advanced strategy for building rapport is what I call creating rapport hooks. What you want to do is to get people to actually try and build rapport with you. And the harder they have to work to build rapport with you, the more that rapport will be worth to them, and the more they'll continue to work to maintain it later on. Now, how do you get people to work for rapport? Rapport hooks have been designed to get people to ask more questions, to come back to you over and over again in order for you to fill in the gaps. Let's imagine, for example, I was telling you a story and I say something like, so I arrived at Heathrow Airport, and as soon as the guy saw my passport, he said, Mr. Ledkowski, would you please come with me? We've been waiting for you. So take me off to a room, and to cut a long story short, I managed to get out there in the end, and I've missed my appointment. So I go straight back to the hotel and think about what I'm going to do next. Now, if you think about it, I've given you pieces of information there that really aren't complete. There should be questions in your mind right now, like, why were they waiting for me? What did they do to me when they took me aside to a special room? What meeting did I miss? And what did I do about it? Now, all that information was packaged almost casually. The biggest mistake people do in trying to get other people to be interested is they shove information down people's throat. The classic example is the slightly insecure rich person telling everyone how great his Porsche is. A more subtle way of actually getting that information across and having someone earn the right to ask about it would be to say, well, so I was there at a party and I offered to give some people a lift, but sadly, I only have one spare seat in my car. It's only a two-seater, so I really couldn't get everyone a lift. Then when people ask what car he has, he can actually present the information as though it wasn't even his idea. It's a much more elegant way of actually giving information, and more importantly, because people have earned the right to have it, it seems that much more important and that much more real. Using rapport hooks can also help you to fractionate rapport. Remember, in fractionation, we are adding a little bit of rapport, then taking it away, adding a little bit of rapport, then taking it away. So how does that actually translate into actual behavior? Well, to a certain extent, you can pay attention to someone, be interested, be focused on them, and then maybe kind of casually get distracted, look around the room, maybe see someone else, and observe whether they try to re-engage you. In other words, trying to strike up the conversation again. If they do, you have already the foundations of rapport, and more importantly, they're working for it. So when you focus on them completely, they will go deeper into that state of comfort and trust than they were before. Rapport hooks are wonderful devices for this, because rather than them sitting there wondering about, what do I say next, how can I get his interest back, all you have to do is to ask your question about something you've already mentioned. So for example, if I say to someone, as an example, you might tell people, I just come back from America, and I found this wonderful thing there, a little device, that literally allows you to almost read someone else's thoughts. It's a crazy idea. Like, the first time someone used this with me, I thought, these people have to be kidding. How do they do this? But then they showed me the device itself and how it works, and I suddenly went, wow, think of all the possibilities that I could use this in. Now let's stop there for a moment. If I use this as a rapport hook, the one big theme that's already open is the fact that I've been to America. Now, someone might ask me, whereabouts have I been? If I mention the same about New York, they might say, oh, how do you like New York? So the point is, I'm feeding little bits of information without completing it to allow people to then come back to me with questions. And those questions will allow me to develop rapport now that they've earned the right to have it. And because they've earned the right rather than just being given it, it seems much more valuable and they'll actually go further with it. Remember that you want to fractionate this so that you'll constantly be pushing and pulling, putting your attention on them, putting your attention on them, and pulling back a little bit, just to see what happens. The more you do this, the deeper the relationship will develop. And it's actually a very, very quick way to get to levels of comfort and trust with someone that, in normal circumstances, would otherwise be considered far too quick. Now that you have some insights on how to take your rapport skills beyond the normal levels, let's have a look at the signal recognition systems. Now, it's very important that you learn to see the world as it is, not as you want it to be. A lot of people go through the world and all they see is the thing they expect to be there, the things that they want to be there. It's very important that you first of all realize what is actually out there, and secondly, learn to recognize the signals that you're being successful with whatever you're doing. You see, Milton Erickson, the psychiatrist that employed hypnosis a long time before he was officially allowed to, had such a wonderful sense of recognizing other people's signals. He could literally tell if a woman had had an affair by the way that she walked into his office and sat down in the chair. One lady walked in, sat down in the chair, and said to him, well, I have a problem, and I've seen hundreds of psychiatrists, and to be honest with you, I don't know why I'm here, because I don't think you can help me either. You won't even know what the problem is, like all the others. Erickson took one look at her and said, Madam, I think I know exactly what you've come here for. In a moment I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock and surprise you. And once I've told you this, you'll realize that I am the right therapist to be working with you. Then he leaned forward and he said, Madam, how long have you been a woman for? Now, what was happening there is, the lady walked in. It turns out, actually was not a woman, but was actually a man. Erickson had done something very, very clever. He had recognized a certain signal that gave away that this was not a natural woman. You see, when a woman develops and first starts growing breasts, she begins to learn how to move her hand around the breasts automatically so that it doesn't keep bumping into them. This man, who had had every other mannerism of a woman down, so that he looked, acted, and sounded just like a real woman, had actually brushed past his own breast on the way to picking some lint off his shoulder, in such a way that Erickson instantly knew that this was not someone used to maneuvering around his own chest, and that told him all he needed to know. Think about it. Such a small signal will give him so much information. In a similar event, he was walking through a hospital that he was working in one day when a colleague of his, a female doctor, walked past him. And just as she comes up to him, Erickson turns around and says, "Congratulations on your new pregnancy." The woman went into shock and she said, "Dr. Erickson, how did you know I was pregnant? In fact, I myself am only just coming back from my doctor now, who told me the news this morning." You see, what Erickson had done there is he realized again that when a woman becomes pregnant, there are certain changes that occur in her body. There are micro changes in the way that her pelvis is structured, and even her hairline will move up by a fraction or two. And Ericsson had such acute visual recognition that he noticed that this person had changed from the last time he saw her in that tiny amount, but it was enough to tell him that she was pregnant. So now we're going to focus our attention on creating that kind of exquisite signal recognition systems in you, so that you can see when people are going into trance, and you can see when people are responding to you in the way you want them to. Now, a lot of the things that we'll be covering will be based around exercises, so I'm going to save a lot of these things for the exercise section later. But we'll talk about a few principles first, and then we'll run through all of the exercises, both for rapport and for learning to recognize the signals that people are actually responding to you hypnotically. Now, when I was growing up, I was into martial arts, as many young boys are. And I remember a lot of the old stories about the ancient masters who had such acute awareness that they could seemingly be asleep, but even then they knew exactly when a thief was coming to their house, or they almost knew how someone was going to attack them before they knew it themselves. Now, for a long time, I thought that this was just an interesting story told to people to encourage them to train better and harder. Until one day, I came across an interesting tradition on the islands of Hawaii. The Hawaiian kahunas were keepers of the law of their particular traditions. They were, if you like, shaman that had some very special powers. And one of the things that they could do is they could enter this state of awareness in which they could see everything, hear everything, and be so perceptive that they not only could tell minute differences in people, they also noticed when their environment was changing, so they knew when it would be a good time to fish or a good time to hunt. Now, everyone thought that these powers were magical, but really, they had developed their powers of awareness to such an extreme level. They just were very, very aware and very, very connected to the world around them. Now, this seems like a bit of a amazing state to be in, and perhaps a lost art. But I actually believe that everyone is capable of this. You see, one day, I was a teenager and I was sent off to a holiday camp by my parents. This holiday camp was in France, and it was centered around boys doing all kinds of water sports, canoeing, kayaking, even sailing. Now, one day, we had gone through as a whole troop of 30 or 40 boys. We'd been swimming down this channel, this little river, in our kayaks, and we'd stopped off at a little island to take a break and have a big picnic. Now, whilst everyone else was having a picnic, one of the instructors walks around and starts picking out a few of the boys to come with him. Now, these were the more adventurous of the boys. And so a handful of maybe 5 or 6 or maybe 7 boys, we all followed this guy up behind a little trail, up over the top of a small cliff. And there we stood on an empty rock platform. At this point, something really interesting happened. The guide, or the leader, turned around to us and said, "Okay, boys, we're going to do something which is a little bit unusual. But before we do this, I have a question for you. Do you trust me?" Now, I don't know about you, but the moment someone asks me if I trust them, I'm already beginning to think that something's going on. So we're all starting to get a little bit nervous here, but of course, under the pressure of the situation, everyone says, "Yes, of course we trust you." So he turns around to us and says, "Okay, put your life vests and helmets on." And as soon as we'd done that, he said, "In a moment, we're going to line you all up one by one. What I want you to do is run down this side of this rock face as fast as you can, and when you get to the edge, to the ledge of the cliff, I want you to jump as far and as hard as you can. And whatever you do, do not look down. Just run as fast as you can, and then jump as far as you can. And whatever you do, do not look down." Now, at this stage, all of us were kind of a little bit nervous, okay? Everyone's looking at each other, and no one really wanted to be the first. So one of the other boys, one of the more courageous ones, decided to volunteer. He stood up in front, and with everyone cheering him on, he runs as fast as his teenage legs could take him. He gets to the edge, he jumps, and just as he's jumping and is hanging midair, he looks down, and he goes, "Oh my God!" And then he disappears. screaming and yelling all the way down. At this point, everyone else becomes twice as nervous. So the first person's disappeared. The rest of us are hanging back and we're terrified. Nobody wants to be the next person. We all look at each other and suddenly one of the boys volunteers to go second. He runs as fast as he can, he jumps, we're all cheering like crazy, and then he disappears off the cliff as well, shouting and screaming all the way down. The third boy goes, the fourth. By the time the fourth boy is jumping, I'm beginning to think to myself, well, if I don't go right now, I never will. Because I'm beginning to think too much about this. I need to just do it. So I line up next. I have my helmet on, I have my life vest on, I'm ready to go. All the boys are cheering. The instructor is there giving me instruction, just sort of cheering me on. And I run as fast as I can run. And I'm running, I get to the edge, and I jump as hard and far as I can jump. And there comes a point, just as I'm leaping through midair, before gravity catches up with me, where everything just becomes still. Everything becomes totally calm. It's like time is just totally stopped between one second and the next. And I remember very clearly just looking around, seeing everything at the same time. I could see the boys screaming on one side, and the other side of the river on the other side. I could see straight down what felt like miles below me, the river streaming by, and a few heads bobbing in the water where the other boys were still swimming back to shore. And this whole moment seemed to last out forever. Now, that state of complete clarity, of being totally in the moment, totally aware, seeing everything around you, hearing everything around you, being in connection with the world around you, is a very important state to be in. It is a kind of altered state, but is one of heightened awareness, and is something which you're about to practice so that you can read people's signals more accurately, and you have a greater connection to both the outside world and your own intuitions. Now, the exercise you're about to do has hypnotic elements in it. It requires all of your focus and attention, so if you're driving a car or operating any kinds of machinery, just stop whatever you're doing and only play the next track as soon as you're ready to focus all of your attention safely on the process of learning this heightened state of awareness. So, as you're ready to learn this heightened state of awareness now, just sit somewhere comfortably, or better still, stand up. I'd like you to focus all of your attention on a point somewhere above eye level, maybe where the ceiling and the wall meet, or a corner of the room. And I want you to find a specific point that you can focus all of your attention on. So you're beginning to feel all your focus narrowing down like a tunnel vision on this one specific point. Focus every ounce of your concentration on that. Try and make out every little beat of detail that you can get a hold of. Now you'll realize as you're doing this that it actually takes a lot of strain and effort to do this. So when you're ready, just allow your eyes to relax. Keep looking at that point, but your eyes will begin to soften, and as they relax the muscles in the eyes, you'll notice that your vision tends to expand. You can see more of the room that you're in. Maybe the ceiling, the walls, the corners of the room, the color of the carpet or whatever the floor is made of. And as you continue to relax with your eyes open, you'll notice that your vision tends to expand all the way around you. Allow it to expand so that you could almost get a sense of knowing what it would be like to see through the eyes in the back of your head. And as you continue to do this, allow your breathing to change. You'll notice at some point your breathing just relaxes even more, whilst your vision expands and you're totally aware of the outside world. As soon as your breathing becomes automatic and calm and relaxed, you can bring your eyes down to normal eye level only as slowly as you maintain this heightened state of awareness, seeing everything around you. Now, as you're doing this, I'd like you to go ahead and pay attention to your ears. Now, your ears are like a sonar device, and I'd like you to pay attention to all the little sounds that you can hear. First will be the sound of my voice. Perhaps you can hear some background noises in the house or outside, in the streets or in the garden outside where you are. Begin to expand your hearing so that the more you hear, the more you become aware of your own sight and vision. Vision and hearing blending together. That's right. And now, turn your attention towards your feelings. Imagine, if you would, a giant ball of energy inside of you, beginning to glow and grow all around you, beginning to expand, so it begins to actually fill the room around you. And wherever this ball of energy seems to touch, I'd like you to get a sense of what it would feel like to touch that surface with your own hand, so that your feelings are reaching out and touching the furniture, the things lying around in the room, all the way out to the walls, so you get a sense of the distinctions between the things in the room, becoming a part of it all together. Now allow all of your attention to focus on the three senses at the same time, so you see everything around you. And as you see it, you get a sense of what it would feel like to touch it. At the same time, you're hearing the sounds and all these sensations blending into one. You're totally connected to everything around you. If there are people in the room, you can be connected to them also. A sense of total awareness, calm awareness, relaxed awareness. Maintain your focus on the outside whilst maintaining a complete comfort and calmness on the inside. You will have noticed that your thinking has slowed down. In time, the thoughts inside your mind will stop altogether. For now, just enjoy this state, and know that you can come back to this at any time that you wish to. This state is also a state of heightened awareness for learning. So were you to choose to enter this accelerated learning state in order to listen to the rest of these audio CDs, then you would probably find yourself learning more quickly and understanding things more clearly. And you can do that anytime you wish now. Welcome back again. Now that you've learned to enter the accelerated learning state, this heightened state of awareness, I'd like you to use it in order to be able to spot the signals that people are responding to you hypnotically. Now, if you've done your homework and followed the exercises on the first CDs, you'll notice that when people are highly focused and beginning to enter trance-like states, that somehow things change about their physiology. Their breathing changes, their look changes. There are different changes that occur that tell you this person is entering an altered state of mind. Now, I'd like you to give you a list now of some of the signs you should look out for that tell you that someone is entering trance. Some of these things you should have found out already by pure observation. Some of these things you may not have been aware of, and now that I make you aware of them, you can go back out again and compare that to the things you see in the real world and I think you'll find that they exist whenever trance does. Now, it's important that you realize that this signal recognition system is not about seeing a specific sign. For example, someone blinks faster and that means they're in trance. What it means is you're looking for specific changes from the norm. So the signs I'm about to show you are not so much signs all by themselves. They're signs only to the extent that these things occur and are different from the way they were when you first started the conversation. So you're looking for changes in behavior, in physiology, not necessarily a specific thing to be happening. Now, the first thing you can look out for is pupil dilation. If you look at people's pupils, the black center of their eyes, as they go into a trance and begin to relax and feel more comfortable around you, you'll notice a tendency for the pupils to dilate, become larger. Now, of course, this will change according to the environment. So if it's a bright sunny day, you'll get less pupil dilation than in a quiet, intimate atmosphere. It's just the nature of the way light reacts with the eyes. Another thing you can look out for is a slowing down of the pulse. Now, before you ask yourself, how am I supposed to find out the pulse without touching their wrist and even finding it? Well, there are certain points on the body where the blood vessels actually come very close to the skin, and you can actually see the pulse ticking away. One such place is the side of the neck. With a lot of people, and not necessarily everyone, and not necessarily all the time, but with a lot of people, if you watch the side of the neck, you can actually watch the pulse ticking regularly, which means you can see the pulse speeding up and slowing down. Now, whilst the pulse is usually slower in trance, sometimes the fact that it's speeding up can also be a suggestion that they're going into a hypnotic state. And the reason for this has to do with what are you communicating. If you're communicating things to do with excitement or danger, well then it's appropriate for the pulse to speed up because they're responding to your communication. And I hope you understand what I mean by that. Another place that you can see a pulse is on the ankle. A lot of times there's a vein that crosses the ankle bone itself, particularly easy to spot in ladies who are wearing skirts. Of course, with every person that you meet, you may find other areas where the pulse is just naturally more obvious. Another giveaway sign is a change in the pattern of breathing. Again, typically this will be a slower pattern of breathing, but sometimes, even when they're relaxing, their breathing will speed up. So when you're looking for the change of breathing, what you're really being aware of is, are they breathing a different rate to the way they normally breathe? If they are, then they're in an altered state, because breathing is directly linked to people's state of mind. Now, before you go off and stare directly at people's chest, especially if you're looking at a woman's chest, that kind of thing is going to get you in trouble. So, to be able to spot someone's breathing without having to be obvious about it, again, use your peripheral vision, use your expanded sense of awareness, and look out of the corner of your eye. Now, they either can see the rising and falling of the chest out of the corner of your eye. Other places you can look is the rising and falling of people's shoulders, because as they breathe in and their rib cage lifts, their shoulders will have a tendency to lift as well. Another sign that people are entering into trance is that their facial features begin to smooth out as the muscles underlying the face itself begin to relax. As a rule, people's faces will tend to become more symmetrical as well. If you look at a person's face straight on, you'll notice that a lot of times there's a sort of dissymmetry. The left side and the right side of the face will very rarely match on people. But as they tend to go into trance, there tends to be a smoothing out as the face becomes more balanced. Something you will have spotted already, if you've done the exercise, is that people's attention is absorbed. That means you can see things like their eyes are fixed on one point in space, maybe the eyes begin to glaze over slightly. There tends to be no movement in the eyes. These are all good signs that the other person's attention has been fixated, which means they're beginning to go into a trance. Another subtle sign is a change in people's blink reflex. Now, what kind of changes are we looking for? Both faster blinking and slower blinking is a good sign. In fact, sometimes people stop blinking altogether. Don't let that disturb you. It's just a sign that their eyelids have become what's called cataleptic. In other words, that the muscles in the eyes have frozen for a moment in time. It's one of the signs that people are accessing a trance response. Another example of a trance feature to look out for is a change in the swallowing mechanism. Typically, when someone first goes into a trance, they'll begin to swallow more frequently, and then, after a few minutes, their swallow reflex will slow down, sometimes stopping altogether. A classic giveaway, although one which will be less useful for you in conversation hypnosis, is that their eyelids will begin to get heavy or fatigued and close all the way down. Now, that's fine if you're going for a formal induction, but I think you'll find that in most conversations, because people feel somehow embarrassed to close their eyes and fall asleep in front of other people, that their eyes will remain open even though they might find themselves getting a bit tired. Other signs of trance happening are an immobility of movement. When people stop moving, there's a tendency that they're to be in trance. So if you meet someone who at first has a lot of hand gestures and mannerisms and head movements, etc., and gradually those movements slow down and then stop altogether, that is a sign that they've entered an altered state of mind and are responding to you hypnotically. On a slightly similar line, you can also have involuntary muscle twitches. Sometimes when someone goes into a trance, you'll find like a facial tic beginning, or maybe their shoulder begins to twitch. These are all signs that they're relaxing and the muscles are going through a sort of cathartic process. Other more subtle signs are changes in skin color or skin tone itself. As people go into trance and relax more, the blood tends to flow more freely, so they will typically look a little darker, a little bit more color in their hands and in the face. Sometimes the opposite will recur. Sometimes they'll become a little paler as the blood withdraws from those areas. Either way is fine. It's just a physiological response telling you that they're going into a trance. As a rule, people's voices will also change as they go into trance. The voice will typically be slower. The speech will be a little different in tonality. Sometimes people will stop speaking altogether. And this relates to the final example of a trance response. This is what I call an increase in passive responses. As a rule, as people go into a trance, they become less argumentative, more agreeable, and really more passive, more willing to follow your lead. And as you review this list of items, you'll find that there are many more signals that you can find yourself, but this is really the core of your signal recognition systems. In a moment, we'll come on to the exercises for today. And one of the things that you really must pay attention to is to go out there and spot as many of these signals that people are going into a trance and are responding to you as you can. Because one thing will surprise you. It is that people are going into trances all the time. So the more you get spotted, the less work you have to do. Because then, in time, you'll learn how to hijack or borrow people's own trances to make your job much easier. So let's have a look at some exercises that you can do between now and the next CD in order to take your rapport skills beyond the normal level, and in order to build this signal recognition system so that you are more aware of what's going on around you. The first exercise I'm going to have you do is very simple and something you should already be familiar with. It's basically recovering the foundations of basic rapport, because they are very important. The foundations of basic rapport are 4 things. Number 1, whenever you meet someone, smile. A smile has a tremendous impact on other people. Make and maintain eye contact. Now, your purpose when making eye contact is to see if you can keep your eye contact for as long as possible without looking away, and this is important, without becoming aggressive. So have like friendly smiling eyes. If you smile with both your eyes and your mouth, and lock eye contact at the same time, at that point, your eyes do not become aggressive, they don't become a confrontation. So smile, make friendly eye contact and keep it for as long as you can. Find agreement with someone else. The more people agree with you, the more agreeable the flow of conversation, the more you will build rapport. And finally, enthuse. Use the power of your emotions to really build a wonderful state around yourself that other people are attracted to. So these are just the basic rapport techniques that you'll be familiar with from other things. If you are familiar with matching and mirroring, by all means, feel free to do some of that. But we'll cover something more powerful than that shortly. Exercise 2 is practice the instant rapport technique. To remind you of the steps, number 1, remember a person that you really like and feel good around. When you get that feeling inside yourself, begin to focus on it and make it grow larger. If it has a color associated to it, then spread it around yourself until you feel the entire feeling in your entire body. Then imagine it spreading outside your body and begin to focus your attention on the other person, the one you want to have instant rapport with. Project that feeling through yourself and maybe like a color or like a hand to touch first the outside of the person and then to penetrate on the inside, connecting the two of you together. Whilst you're doing this, remember to project the sense of goodwill and enjoyment. And it's as simple as that. Then allow your unconscious mind to naturally enter whatever states of matching and mirroring or whatever it is you want to do whilst you get on with a normal conversation. Exercise 3 is to practice this heightened state of awareness. In order to do this, very simply, focus all of your attention on a specific point above eye level. Force your eyes to really find distinctions, which will create a little bit of tension in your eyes. When you feel that, then allow your eyes to relax. Let the tension just drift away. And you'll notice that your vision will expand into peripheral vision. You'll see out of the sides of your eyes more and more of the room that you're in. Then wrap that sense of vision around you so you have a sense of seeing 360 degrees around you, above you, and below you. Once you have that, pay attention to your hearing and do the same sort of thing with your hearing. Allow your hearing to hear more and more things around you. Finally, do the same thing with your feelings. Expand your sense of feelings to fill up the entire room like a glowing ball of energy. And then combine all three sensations, your hearing, your feelings, and what you're seeing, all at the same time, so that you are completely connected to your environment. This is your heightened state of awareness. Exercise 4 is for those of you who are less familiar with matching and mirroring. For those of you, just simply go out and find a public space where people who know each other and like each other hang out together. A coffee shop, a bar, a restaurant, whatever. And all you want to do is spot the people, the couples, the friends that are friends together and watch their body language. What things look the same? What rhythms are the same? How do they move in a kind of silent dance with each other? You can even spot this actually watching TV. Turn the sound off and watch which people are meant to be harmonizing and which ones aren't. The body language will tell it all. Exercise 5 will develop a very important skill in you. The skill of being able to see whether someone is agreeing with you or disagreeing with you, saying yes or no to you before they even say anything. This will be very important later when you almost learn to read people's minds by recognizing the signals. To do this, it's very simple actually, although it will take effort and a bit of practice to get this really honed down. What you want to do is when you start talking to people, friends and colleagues or complete strangers, begin by making random comments which they have to agree with, and then make a few random comments that they can't agree with. For example, let's say your friend has come from town and bought a new pair of shoes. You might make statements like, "Oh, so you just come from town and you've got a new pair of shoes. And are they black shoes? Or have you bought jeans?" Now, knowing that there were white shoes and that she hasn't bought jeans will force them to give you a no response on both. Now, you're not interested in their verbal response, whether they say yes or no. What you're interested in, what is it that they do just before they begin to speak? And if you can spot a pattern, that will tell you when they're agreeing with you and when they're disagreeing with you. So remember, if you wait to see what's happening until after they've spoken, you're too late. You must catch the response that occurs just before they even begin to speak. And then you'll have almost psychic abilities to read other people's minds, whether they're agreeing and disagreeing with you. Okay, now exercise 6 will totally open your awareness so you're constantly aware of your environment and in that moment of flow. For exercise 6, you have to play this with a friend who knows you're playing this game with them. And it's a very simple game. I call it the touching game because you can spend a day with your friend doing whatever it is you do normally. Now, the purpose of this game is that at some point in the day you casually reach over and touch the other person's head. The importance is that you move very slowly. Now, the other person, if they see you moving towards their head, they can simply put a hand up to stop you doing this. It's not about speed, it's about awareness. In other words, your job is to spot the moments in which their mind is so preoccupied with something else or so internalized that they won't even see you coming up and touching them. And they'll do the same to you. Now, what this does is, it will force you to be aware of your environment all the time as you're walking around. And you'll notice that there's so many things in life that you will miss when you're not normally aware, because this game will force you to be totally present and in the moment. Exercise 7 is the final exercise for this CD. This is a signal reading system which will really attune your ability to read the signals that other people want you to know about them. You see, the way that people talk, the way they move, and the way they dress will tell you a lot of things about who they are. And a lot of these things are actually done unconsciously. They don't even realize what they're saying about themselves when they dress a certain way, speak a certain way, and move a certain way. And yet, they're still doing it. To get good at this, to be able to read people like this, what I want you to do is just go again into a public place where you'll find all kinds of people. And then watch an individual doing something, whatever it happens to be, buying some fruit, buying a coffee, whatever happens. Now then, I want you to watch them, and based on the things that they're wearing, the way that they're moving, and even the tonality of their voice if you can hear it, I want you to make up a story about them. Make guesses about what kind of person they are, what they do for a living, and what they like and dislike in life, what the things they admire, and what things they dislike in life. You can base this on their jewelry, their mannerisms, their clothes, anything that gives you a clue into them. Now, once you've played this for a while, you can actually go up and start talking to people and find out if you're right. Now, the way you can find out is you have a normal conversation. At some way, you'd look and turn around and say, hey, you strike me as the kind of person who, I don't know, really likes people, or who dislikes authority, or whatever it is that you've guessed this person to be like. At that point, if they agree or disagree with you is irrelevant. The point is, it will give you more information and begin to refine your ability to make good, educated guesses about what other people are like, based entirely on the way they behave, the way they dress, and the way they do things. Well, we've come to the end of this CD2, Beyond Rapport and Signal Recognition Systems. As soon as you finish these exercises, you'll be ready for CD3, Hypnotic Language Foundations. These foundations will be the building blocks of which you can build your entire conversational hypnosis experience. On the next CD, you'll discover your very first trance inductions based purely on language. You'll discover the language of trance and how to create hypnotic language completely spontaneously to make it fit every single moment that you're in. You'll also discover the hypnotic tonalities, the ways you can use your voice to make people want to respond to you and to do as you ask them to do, as well as becoming a little bit more charismatic and interesting in the way that you communicate. All these things await you on CD3. Until then, enjoy learning from these exercises.